join in. For those who don't know me, I'm Aude. I'm a theory tutor here at ED on the MA in Fashion and Accessory Design. Anja, you are the founder and editor-in-chief of Vestoj, a journal on sartorial matters and a platform for critical thinking on fashion. You are also a senior research fellow at the London College of Fashion. You lecture all around the world. And you were a guest tutor at HED this year, actually. You were invited by Christine Rouge and Peter Wisman to meet with MA2 students. I would like here to thank Christine, which you see here, for suggesting we do this talk and inviting me to moderate it. We have a solid hour together this afternoon to discuss a number of things. Firstly, your trajectory, Anja, in fashion. Then Vestoj, obviously, what does writing about fashion entail? What's theory's place in fashion, etc. And then I would like to end on fashion education, your experience of it, and how you see the relationship between theory and practice move forward in that context. I would like to preface this talk by saying that as a theory tutor working in fashion education, I spent quite a lot of time soul searching, looking for material that could be of use to designers, looking for writing that was accessible, engaging, critical, yet empowering. And I found a lot of it in Vestoj. I think it's no exaggeration to say that the journal really constituted, when it first came out, a unique and much needed platform for thinking fashion and writing, setting out to bring industry and academia closer together as Vestoj did was one bold bid, and something we'll discuss in a bit. The conversation on the relationship between theory and practice is obviously really important to fashion education, particularly since issues surrounding the industry's unsustainability have taken center stage. I haven't been in fashion education that long, but I feel that there's a real craving for writing on fashion, for new perspectives, for decentering also of fashion histories, and a real desire to move beyond the old debates. Fashion is frivolous, no, it's serious. We'll touch upon this as well in a bit. So Anja, thank you for making all of that happen. Before we get into some of these questions, I wanted to ask you how you first came to fashion and what's your personal relationship to clothes?
I first came to fashion as a consumer, reading magazines. I mean, as so many other young women, you know, reading my mom's magazines and buying my own teen magazines. But it never, like, I grew up in Sweden, not in the capital, and anyway, in Sweden. Sweden hasn't been, I mean, now it's different, but when I was growing up, it was a kind of no nonsense approach to clothing. In the city where I grew up, there were no, it was one of the bigger cities in Sweden, but still there were no boutiques where you could buy any of the fashion that I was, reading about in these glossy magazines. So fashion always felt really far away from me growing up. So it never occurred to me that I could work in it, that it could be like, that there was an industry there that welcomed people that weren't actually designers, that there was something, that there was a way of engaging with fashion beyond design, which I somehow always knew I wouldn't be doing, and so I remember it first when I finished school and I had a gap year in South America, and it was time for me to choose what to study at university. And I remember sitting with my dad and going through a lot of different school catalogs. I knew I wanted to go to London, and coming across fashion education, like fashion communication and promotion was the only thing that you could study at that time in London that was not design. And I remember, like, God, I haven't thought about this for so long, but I remember sitting and doing this application with him, and he was very encouraging to, like, whatever I wanted to do, he would like try and find out about it with me and push me and support me in applying, which I did. And so I went to London, started studying fashion communication and promotion, and really didn't like it. I thought it was very silly. It was nothing like, we didn't learn anything. I was super frustrated. I thought that we were just sort of like I didn't feel like he didn't take it seriously. There was no like, the history that we learned was very it's like there was no it wasn't very challenging. I felt like I could just continue reading fashion magazines and kind of get the same wealth of information. This was at Central St. Martin's in London, and so I switched courses to fine art instead, because I felt that in fine art I would have, because at the time theory was very important in fine art, and philosophy was very important in fine art, and reading and writing I always loved, and I thought this in this education I could get I could be more challenged and learn more, which I did. And then eventually I graduated, started doing internships as a stylist, and decided styling wasn't for me, and then went back and did a master's degree in history and theory of fashion at the Royal College. And that was the course that I'd been like waiting for. That was amazing for me. Then I first had like inklings of how you could, the relationship really between theory, history, writing about fashion, and the practice of fashion, the industry, which is what I then proceeded to try and make into my own career. But you asked me also about my personal. Go ahead.
Yes, on that maybe, who were the sort of scholars or critical thinkers you thought were really interesting when you first started thinking about fashion and doing fashion theory? Maybe in the context of your MA?
Well, actually, it was curious actually, because no, it was history and theory of design that I studied, and I was actually the only person who focused on fashion within that. In our class, there was nobody else that decided to do history and theory of fashion, and so there wasn't. The teachers were design historians. They weren't fashion historians. So there wasn't really, I mean, they were fantastic in terms of pointing me towards sociology, philosophy. I remember reading Foucault, Michel Foucault, the French theorist, for the first time. I remember, wrestling with Roland Barthes and, not understanding too much of it, still don't. I remember, who else, like Walter Benjamin, another classic in design theory that we were reading, and but there wasn't. I didn't really. I had to look myself really for the fashion theory part. But I remember Christopher Brouard was in this course, was at the Royal College of Art, but it was between the Royal College of Art in London and the Victoria and Albert Museum, and we were at the V&A Museum. That was where we had our classes, and in the research department there, Chris Brouard was one of the. I think he was the head of the research department then, and I just connected with him because I would see him every day. I would walk through the research department to get to our homeroom, and he was always the best dressed of the scholars, and I was always the best dressed of the students, and so we just found each other, like, because we were like mutual appreciation of, you know, how you just clock somebody, you know, we would see each other and just kind of clock each other, not say very much, maybe just hello or whatever at first. And then I suppose when we eventually got like somehow were introduced at some course event, or I can't remember what it was exactly, we got along very well from the beginning, because we were both, you know, in my case, a budding scholar, I mean a student, and for him, you know, he was already had already published a lot, but still, like in fashion theory, it's a lot of times, and maybe that goes back to your other question about my personal relationship to clothes, because at least the first an older generation of fashion scholars, some of whom are now my colleagues at LCF, and anyway, people who I was, you know, whose work I was coming to as a young scholar, a lot of the times, these are scholars who've come to fashion from other disciplines, sociology, perhaps philosophy, art history, economics, you know, whatever it might be. And then, so they come with that, from that discipline, and then apply that discipline to fashion. But they are not necessarily, and as I discovered, not so often people who, this is a generalization of course, but who seem to take so much pleasure in the consumption of fashion itself, like, which I do, and I always have. And so I think my my personal relationship to clothes and to fashion is as ambivalent as it probably is for a lot of other people. Love it, hate it, you know. It's but ultimately, yeah, God, I love playing with clothes. I mean, I love looking beautiful, you know, to my own standards, and you know, to some kind of acceptable standards for other people as well, of course. And yeah, and I love thinking about my own consumption of clothes, and I love thinking about, you know, other people's consumption of clothes. I love all the rules of the industry and how it works, and seeing it firsthand and being a part of it, and seeing how fashion affects me, like, you know, on a sort of visceral gut level, you know, rather than a sort of remote academic level.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the sort of strengths for Vestoj, is to have this kind of embodied part of fashion feature quite heavily also in its content. But just on the industry there, you worked for Acne, right, for a number of years. What did you make of the fashion industry at the time when you sort of finished your MA and got into the industry?
I knew early on, as an MA student, that I didn't want to work in academia, because I love, as I was saying, I love the industry, I love the pace, I love the objects, I love the networking, hobnobbing, like glamour, all of that stuff that that the industry represented to me. So I always so I always knew I wanted to go into the industry and work in the industry, but I was trying to figure out how to do it in a way that would also somehow incorporate challenging some of its norms, or looking at it perhaps with more through a more overtly critical lens, maybe, or yeah, incorporating this kind of critical thinking and analysis that I was bringing with me from academia. And so when I first came into Acne, I mean, I remember coming to the company full of ideas of how things should be, and how, what kind of references made sense, like, or would make the company stronger. I was working in communications. I'm going to go and have to get some water soon. But I was working in communications for a while. Mm-hmm. And then I edited also simultaneously, and then continued to edit Acne Paper, which was a magazine that the company had for 10 years. Very high production value, very beautiful and sophisticated. And I was trying to bring in an element of fashion theory or critical. I'm going to go and get some water.
Yes.
Okay. So I don't start.
We'll start talking about Vestoj.
For everybody in the space here, for the ones that will be open and happy to put off the camera, of course, it's always super nice for the person who speaks to have some faces in front of her or him. So yeah, let's say, please feel free to switch your camera on. Of course, you could also switch it off sometimes, but yeah, that was rather an invitation and not an obligation.
So let's.
Better.
Oh yeah, great. Hi, I can see faces. Let's go to Vestoj. And first question then, what prompted you to start the publication?
It sort of goes to the previous question, that part of the previous question that I left unanswered, about what I made of the industry coming into it as a student, as a young graduate. And it had to do with with trying to find a space for I suppose, like, trying to find a space for some sort of alternative way of talking about fashion, or especially, I think in my case, particularly finding a space for good, challenging, thought-provoking writing about fashion. I mean, this was something that I found super frustrating in my work, from, like, how to write press releases, which I was doing at the beginning of my work at Acne, to what space the text occupied in the magazine that I was editing, Acne Paper, like, and always finding that the visual language in fashion is so prioritized over text, and that becomes a kind of vicious circle in a way, where there's an assumption that people don't read about fashion, so there's no point putting a lot of effort into the text, into how you write about fashion, which then of course means that people don't want to read it because it's not good, and so it goes on and on like this. And so I started Vestoj really as out of frustration, from being, like, annoyed that the writing about fashion that I came across was of such inferior quality, just too much about the same people in all the magazines, like, certain tropes or sort of cliches that returned, I don't know, from how you write about the latest trends to, you know, how you speak, you know, the questions you might ask a designer or whatever. It's just, it was so formulaic a lot of the times I found, you know, and maybe this was 15 years or so ago when I started working, that I thought it's like starting something new and good here is like, it's not, it's like a no-brainer because there's so little competition out there about, you know, you have academic writing about fashion, which is for academics with a particular jargon, you know, published in textbooks that look dull, that don't have, you know, that have too little of that visual language that the mainstream fashion press puts too much, you know, beautiful, where the, you know, object itself is, you know, has a design value, where the images are interesting and communicate something about the topic, but at the same time producing high quality writing people want to read. Like I couldn't believe why there's the, you know, why was Vestoj was the only one.
Was Vestoj welcomed by the industry and academia when it first came out?
I would say that it's interesting because I found actually that it was very welcomed by academia. I always found, like, very quickly I started being invited to conferences to speak about Vestoj. Like whenever I would contact a scholar asking if he or she would be interested in writing for Vestoj, I got primarily positive responses. And people were proud of being a part of Vestoj and super supportive. After having put out 4 issues, I think, I became a part of LCF, and so then I was kind of formally a part of academia and supported by an academic institution. I figured that there were lots of other people like me out there, of maybe a younger generation of fashion scholars who, or fashion thinkers, because wouldn't say that I'm a scholar exactly, but people who are really invested in the industry and who really love, you know, fashion, the objecthood, like the wearing of clothes, looking at clothes, who are engaged in what's you know, the day-to-day aspect of the industry, and who feel a part of it or want to be a part of it, while also being invested in research and in scholarship, and who had been missing something like Vestoj, you know, who wanted who wanted to feel that they were communicating also to people who work in the industry, or who are not academics. When it came to the fashion industry, I felt there was a lot more resistance, because the fashion industry is just, it's very it's very hierarchical. It's very you must prove yourself before you're welcomed, and so you it's like I you know, this designer doesn't want to, you know, give you the time of day because this other, you know, he wants to see that this other designer has given looking, you know, for something to be given the sign of approval by somebody else before we commit ourselves. I think the industry, fashion industry, is not one for taking, you know, chances on unknown people. And so also I think I think in the fashion industry, perhaps more now, is critical thinking or theory or philosophy or writing even more priority, like more, it has become a form of capital, a way of showing that you're intellectual or that you, I think when, 15, 20 years ago, I think those were perhaps not as that, it didn't have any capital or not very much capital in any sense. Other things were more important. And so a lot of my time and my work and my energy, the first years of Vestoj had to do with, networking in the industry in Paris, where I decided to come to live, to get to know people, create personal relationships, charm people, and get people to say yes to an interview or to help me out or connect me with somebody or whatever, because they liked me, maybe more than because they cared for Vestoj. Mm. And then I think, little by little, because time passes and new things become more established, because there were people who genuinely liked reading Vestoj, and for whom it did fill a gap, and because Vestoj is good, and so with time that also built a readership. Mm. And so now I think, and I think also for myself, because I felt it was much more important to me at the beginning to prove myself to the people I saw as my peers in the industry. And so I felt rejection from the industry much, I took it much more personally than I did, because I always felt more like a visitor in academia, like a sort of, I'm winging it and it does, and I don't really, I don't define myself, don't think of myself as a fashion scholar. I mean, I don't participate in like writing for peer-reviewed journals and this whole system that is part of scholarship. Mm. I'm a research practitioner, as they would say at LCF. Mm. But with the industry, there was a lot more at stake for me, I think.
Fashion studies are very much grounded in a sort of multidisciplinary approaches, and I think Vestoj keeps that tradition very much alive. What is more perhaps like surprising or unique to it is that you also make room for fiction, and I wanted to ask you how you connected theory and why you choose to make it a feature of the journal. And I guess that kind of ties back to what you were just saying about, being a researcher but also a practitioner. And I think on the website, on the Vestoj platform, online platform,
well, I think
you really have sort of fiction, non-fiction interviews, opinion, and fiction is very much the first category there.
Well, I think it is because I'm very much a reader, and I've been lacking, and as I was saying earlier, one of the like biggest impetus for starting Vestoj was to create good writing about fashion, and good writing about fashion can take many different forms. I mean, and should take many different forms. So I want to show with Vestoj that fashion is, you can write about fashion as prose, as poetry. You can write about it as theory. You can do it as oral history. You can do it as personal essay or large scale investigation. Like it's it's like, and with every format that I, as kind of reader, you know, for some readers, you know, taking on the theory aspect of Vestoj might feel daunting, you know. Maybe just the word theory feels daunting, but reading a short story, reading an interview with somebody, it's it can maybe be a more welcoming place, right, to take Vestoj on, and I think also that there's something like, since I'm really I really love this this thing of working to themes and being able to immerse yourself, in my case as a creator, but hopefully also for the reader, like to completely go into like the exploration of like one grand narrative, and then see how that can connect in many different ways to fashion. And I think using fiction and theory and oral histories and like and prose, like those are all, again, it's like all different ways of different dialects, in a way of entering into this universe of the theme and the like big exploration of like fashion as culture, if you like.
There've been sort of calls to address fashion's sort of involvement in reproducing systemic racism, and there have been calls to like decenter fashion histories and bring on new voices. How do you engage with these debates also as someone who has a platform and who sort of writes about fashion?
It's something I've thought a lot about. I mean, obviously, as you know, we all are thinking a lot about it at the moment, and I find myself running up against the like my own limits, in a way, like in the sense that, like, I remember having conversations with my art directors in particular, because they're the ones that I work the closest with amongst my collaborators and contributors. First, like I think a lot of us in fashion were like, okay, who are we representing on the pages here? You know, what the images we have, like how many are women versus how many are men? You know, which ethnicities are we showing in our pictures, and so on. And then, and that felt kind of, in a way, easy to outsource that to my, you know, to the art directors to deal with. And then I started thinking, okay, well, what about the topics we're writing about? Okay, that was the next part, and to try and cover fashion from, you know, as seen in different historical periods, as seen in different countries, continents, cultures. And then I started thinking, okay, so but that is also somehow manageable. But what about the writers? Like, where are they coming from? Like, if I'm asking someone to write about, I don't know, like fashion in fashion history in Ethiopia, let's say, or some designer in Ethiopia, like, who should write that article? Like, is it, you know, is it a someone from my European or North American network, or should it be someone in Ethiopia? I don't know anybody in Ethiopia. How would I get to know somebody there? Where do I start? Like, how do I judge someone's writing that that isn't, let's say, a fashion scholar, or maybe that has a point of view that is hard for me to understand. Same thing when I was starting to look at Chinese fashion. Like, do I ask a Chinese scholar? Their English isn't perhaps, if as good as it needs to be, or if it is, then they are asked by lots of other people to be writing at the same time. If I get someone who writes in Chinese, then I need to get a translator. Do I have the budget for a translator? How do I know? Like, so it's really interesting. Like, I'm saying all this because I have to think about it every time I start an issue or commission an article, and I don't have an answer for it. How do I, with my limited resources, ensure that my network is wide enough to really engage with fashion, like in the decentralized way that we are? Like, and what do I do when like, what does it mean when I'm like realizing that, okay, I have perhaps I have an African American writer, I have an Asian American writer, I have a Latino American writer, but they're all American. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, how is that? Does that mean that I'm decentralizing it, or am I just repeating the kind of dominant Western voice that we are used to when it comes to writing about fashion or about culture? So yeah, that's where I'm at. A lot of questions and attempts, but not a very resolved way of dealing with it, I don't think.
One of the next issues could be like aesthetic decolonization. How to do that, how to go for it, just as an idea. Oh no, Anja just frozen for a second. Oh yes, you're back.
So maybe let's switch to fashion education. You've obviously you're involved in it, and personally, I found that a lot of students have been told that they can't write, or that it's not their thing, and they should channel their creativity in making clothes as opposed to writing, as if writing was not a form of craft that you learn. Have you had that experience? And if so, why do you think writing is bracketed off from making fashion in a way that it's not in the arts? I guess you've touched on this a little bit, but maybe you could share your experience of fashion education, and particularly, writing's place within it.
I think my own experience hasn't been so much about like not having writing prioritized, because in the research department, they're all writers pretty much. Like, writing is the craft that is reproduced or prioritized for researchers. I think for me, in that context, what's been harder has been to communicate the value of a publication that uses theory but is not peer reviewed, for example. Like, in academia, at least in the UK, even within fashion or within other artistic disciplines, still has to conform to the same peer review credentials that you would have to do if you're a researcher in science, let's say, or in some other part of the humanities. Like, that isn't visual. So I think what's like my challenge there has more been about sorry, it's my daughter now. She's like driving into the door with her trottinette, but they're going out now, working from home. No, I think what I was saying was like my challenge has been more to show the value of this cross-disciplinary way of dealing with fashion that isn't really one or the other, and so like falling in this in between space is, you know, on the one hand it's what marks Vestoj out and is, I think, what like that's the whole point of it existing, is that when it comes to fundraising, for example, or even, you know, the value that it has within, you know, the institution that I'm a part of. I think sometimes it's like you know, putting fiction in an academic journal isn't what you would normally do, let's say, you know. I think like I think writing, though, to speak to it more generally, I suppose it has often a strange role in fashion education, because it's kind of tacked on a little bit at the end, like, do your work and then please give us some form of writing that explains your work or puts your work in context, or like, and and maybe talking a little bit to your point, it's then perhaps that you would just know how to put these words together, you know, how to communicate your thoughts in a convincing way, even if you're not a writer. And then if you don't get guidance on, you know, if you've had no guidance throughout your fashion education, and then you get some guidance at the end when it comes to writing your statement, it's, you know, or your thesis, or you know, whatever, then you know, it's not so fair to expect that, you know, that students will go from never thinking about communicating in terms of the written word, and then having to produce something that is of great significance to your final, you know, to how your work is judged in the end, without really, do you know what I'm saying? Like, without being, without having having learned the skills of how to do so.
Maybe back to my point, and then we can the points I mentioned in the introduction, and then maybe we can open the session to questions from the students, since we're sort of talking about them. As I said, I spent quite a lot of time, like, kind of, okay, what do I bring to the table? What kind of text do I bring to the table in the context of fashion design? And I found that, you know, looking at science fiction, Ursula Le Guin, or looking at a sort of hybrid text worked better than, you know, a text from fashion theory, for instance. And I was wondering maybe that this could touch upon your experience at HED. What type of sort of theory or authors do you bring into conversation with fashion designers when you talk about their practice? Have you sort of learned something in the process, realized that there's a particular type of theory that works, or like written output that works well within a design context?
I also often refer to texts that have been published in Vestoj, not necessarily the theory. I refer often to interviews, or I refer to the prose, kind of personal essays. I don't know that I've ever recommended like Walter Benjamin to anybody, for instance, like who's a fashion designer. Because I don't even read Walter Benjamin myself now. I think I'm more interested in I think in perhaps finding fashion writing where you don't like to find it, to your point about science fiction, or like maybe more in terms of saying fashion writing is really any kind of writing where we explore the meaning of appearances or bodies or image. I have had Elizabeth Wilson's Adorned in Dreams on my desk for many months now, and I do recommend that because because it's a seminal text in for fashion scholarship, but because is just it's like the writing poetic, really full of like how do you say, like imagery? Can you say, like, just, you know, it calls to mind a lot of it's full of it connects very fast and directly to personal memory and experience, and yeah, so I think, like, there are certainly some books within fashion scholarship that written, but I suppose I mean, I don't know, like, maybe I ask you back, like, how come you don't recommend texts in you mentioned fashion theory, but
yeah, I do, of course, but it's I realized that first it wasn't sort of I think it's the problem you came up with when you first decided to found Vestoj. It was just too dense, too complicated, and it speaks to academics. So you have to be really sort of mindful of the text you select. But that's why Vestoj was also so helpful, because it was just so sort of straightforward, accessible, but also quite challenging, and it kind of brought new perspectives also to the table on things like copy, for instance, or, you know, a number of things. So it's I think ultimately the field benefits from fashion theory, from Vestoj, from things outside of it, but it does take a little bit of, okay, I'm gonna go get this and then get this and then this, and maybe this will work, but I'm not quite sure. So it's both like, yeah, super exciting, but quite challenging as well to make it work. But I want to let students and the audience ask questions. So if you guys want to switch your cameras on and either share your experience of writing about fashion, or whatever you want to share or ask, feel free to do so, but please don't leave us here alone. So switch your cameras on and go for it.
Yeah.
I will have a, of course, but I let the students or whoever is in this space now, cannot see everybody, go first.
Sophie, you want to jump in and
yeah, first I wanted Anja to say thank you, because I was so excited when I discovered the first issue of Vestoj, and yeah, really thank you for that, because I had so much pleasure to read all the articles and the interviews especially too. So really thank you. And about personal experience about writing, I realized that it can really help my design process. I know it's super personal, but I like to start by the words. And yeah, it really helps to me through all the process. Yeah, as inspiration. And so I love to combine it in the future, writing and practicing design. I would love that.
Is there something in particular, Sophie, that you like to read? Like where do you go for your reading about fashion? Do you remember anything in particular that has made an impression, or
yeah, I really enjoy reading interviews. I like Vestoj, One Granary, also I think it's Mode Pratique, the IFM, Institut Français de la Mode. They published like several issues about fashion. Yeah, everything that I read for my thesis as well, like anything.
Yeah, I feel there's maybe I'm thinking of your essay, particularly Sophie. It's also writing as a designer is also kind of shaping the field, because suddenly you're not like a victim of what is said about fashion, but you can have a say in it. And I feel that's quite important. It's a way of empowering. Did you feel that way as you wrote your essay on sort of precarity in the fashion industries? Did you feel that, you know, writing about it, suddenly you gained kind of power over it?
Yes, definitely. And I definitely think that words have such a strong power and can like shape imaginaries and change ideas, or just like create new things. So I really believe in the power of words and language. And yeah, it's great that there is more and more a place for that in fashion too, I think. So yeah, definitely, yeah, it was empowering.
Anyone else who wants to jump in? I can see names, so I'm kind of tempted to ask Berenice as well, or Sandrine, like what you sort of got out of writing your sort of essays. And I feel particularly maybe Berenice and Sandrine, your work sort of focused on your practice, which was slightly different from Sophie. So could you say something about that? Share something? Sorry to put you on the spot, but I think it's really interesting.
Yes, yes, it was quite difficult for me to write. But yes, the practice was a real support. It was the beginning point, and yes, I think that some really concrete things can be an inspiration for theoretical things and yes, to develop thoughts and to go deeper also in our work. So for me, it works like that. Yes, it's the practice that helped me to write, because it wasn't really intuitive at the beginning.
What about you, Sandrine? How did it go for you? Oh, we can't hear you. I think you have to turn. Oh, okay, I see. You can't speak. Okay, no worries. Anyone else who wants to ask a question or comment? Don't be shy.
Okay, you know what? I'm not shy. Shall I go for it?
Go for it.
Maybe that will like lead to another question from the students, because my question points out in the direction that that your question was, or that we already discussed with Anja, and maybe a bit more direction to the education and what it means for this for a student. And to put out the question, maybe I have to formulate a few sentences, because when I was a student, I felt that creation and theory was split. It was very strange, as if there were two territories, but not interfering or exchanging or anything similar. However, for me, it always felt intuitively, or I had that need, that it was a circular exchange, or maybe even an infinite loop. You know, like a dialogue from between creation and critical thinking, that could be ambivalent, ambiguous, or confusing also. So I always wonder how these two approaches, let's say, can nourish each other. Let's say designing as well as critical thinking understood as a cultural practice. And I'm trying to be more specific. Obviously, writing or thinking is a creative process, and could be, you know, one could be specialized in that, and another person could be a very intuitive person in a more designing or materialization in terms of design or artistic expression through form and material. So, but my question still was, how can they nourish each other, these fields, or is such trial obsolete? Are these simply two different jobs, you know? And if they are, still, what potential there is to bring different people on the table, to have a dialogue, to have maybe a certain framing of questions, to exchange thought or words, as Sophie said, but also to ask the questions and share experiences, to go further. I don't know, I circled a bit around. Was that clear? Or do you have any thoughts about that, Anja?
Maybe, I mean, one thing that I'm kind of experimenting with, just in theory so far, I'm thinking what Vestoj evolve into if it was a more overt kind of research hub or learning initiative or learning platform, and what learning and education might look like outside the academy. And I started thinking about how to combine different formats or ways of knowledge exchanges. You know, that's a sort of word that's used a lot in academia at the moment. Like, you know, what that might look like if we move away from classroom learning and from like thinking of learning as going, you know, from teacher to students in that sort of more hierarchical, I suppose, dynamic. and I've started thinking, you know, of like, for example, if like I'm like, imagine I would put like I have one day to like one long event or workshop day with students or audience members, let's say, rather than students. The students could be anyone, you know, would be defined as anyone who is interested in learning something, right? That could be, I would imagine it to be like a combination of performances, of discussions, of of workshops where you do something with your hands and kind of and you know, think through doing, or be like part theater, part happening, part I don't know, Socratic circle, you know, reading group, or debate group, or, you know, like I think my point is that I'm curious now about how one might combine different ways of approaching learning or education that retain an element of entertainment, perhaps, you know, that retain an element of, you know, storytelling, to use another word that's, you know, so common in fashion and culture at the moment, that well, or that maybe is more about discussion and learning through talking and thinking while you talk, you know, rather than learning from someone who is, you know, there to teach you, you know, maybe more approach it as like as if everyone is there with some kind of equal knowledge or experience, or at least something you know, that's equally valuable, and that the point is to ask the right questions and then get you know, the participants to just, yeah, to learn while we debate, or while we think, or while you know, in discussion. I mean, maybe I don't know, like I think fashion education probably looks very different depending on which school you're at, which country you're in. Like, how I know I have little experience of seeing what it looks like in Shanghai, and it's vastly different to the way it looks like, you know, at LCF in London. Much more hierarchical and much less about like critical thinking, and more about like being able to remember, and like whatever. It's different. But I don't know. I mean, I'm not an educator, so I don't, and I never studied education, so I don't, and I'm only really marginally involved in education. You know, it's in a similar way to the way, you know, in a similar way at LCF to the way I've been involved with you, in terms of coming in and talking to students as they are finishing a project, or dealing with their thesis, or needing feedback on the written word. But I'm not part of the rest of the curriculum, so I don't necessarily know, you know, how what is, you know, I'm only inferring what the institution is prioritizing when it comes to the industry, you know, and how you're teaching that to the students. I mean, I am noticing that you know, to a large degree, it's weird. It's like, on the one hand, I think education at least is like, we have these high-minded ideals of, you know, challenging the industry, building a new industry, you know, putting out the, you know, a new generation, do everything totally differently, and prioritize all the, you know, morally and ethically good things, you know, that we feel are currently lacking in fashion. But I don't know if our teaching methods are, you know, as revolutionary as we are hoping that, you know, the students will go out and be. And so maybe for students, there's a disconnect there, you know, that on the one hand, we are, you know, talking a lot about the value of recycling and sustainability, and decolonizing, you know, the industry, and all the other, you know, all the other important and, you know, righteous aspects of education. But it's very hard to put any of that into practice, I think, as you're, as a young graduate, lowest on the pecking order in some brand that's, where your boss doesn't remember your name even, and you just have to hang on in there. You have to you just have to make sure you don't get fired, and that you're there from one season to the next, and can make the right connections and navigate like professional working life. And perhaps by the time you ascend the ladder a bit and feel more secure, you also get sucked into the system as it is, because it's the system that has made you and has given you the position that you have, and you owe it something in return, and you feel perhaps suddenly that there's more at stake for you, like maybe you have a voice, but it's harder. Like maybe you have a voice in terms of like you are somebody in the industry, but there's also more at stake for you. You have more to lose if you say or do the wrong thing. So I don't know. I obviously don't have any answers. I can just see that something happens from when we are students, and our work is very personal to us, and it's very idealistic, and then we go into the industry and we become the industry. It's not like the people who were in the industry before us were any less concerned about revolutionary things when they were students, but then we're not that different to each other. One generation is not really that different to the one before it, except we get older and other things matter to us. And so perhaps the challenge somehow is to figure out how to give these like I don't know how to put this exactly, but it's like I think in fashion, like the parts, like playing the parts or assuming the part of the kind of whistleblower or the rebel or the one who challenges the system, it's not really a part that I don't know, like I'm just trying to work this out kind of as we're talking, but it seems to me sometimes that if you're a whistleblower in politics, let's say, or even in another part of like maybe even in like as a Hollywood actor, let's say, like perhaps you become blacklisted for certain directors, perhaps you become persona non grata in certain at certain networking events or dinner parties or certain parts of Washington or whatever, but you become a hero for other people, or at least that's that there's the hope for that, that you become a morally upstanding, righteous person with an agenda who can who you become a spokesperson. There's and other platforms open up for you. Perhaps there are actors now that maybe don't do a lot of acting, but they do a lot of public speaking, and they do a lot of I don't know, whereas in fashion, I don't know if we have that really. It's like, I don't know, it's like the parts of fashion that are, that have to do with sustainability or that have to do with, in overall doing the right fusty somehow and dull and kind of it's like too so right it becomes it's like that boring person at the party that just doesn't get it and won't drink anything and is just like you can't wait until they go home. Like I'm not sure if I'm expressing myself in a very eloquent way, but I wonder sometimes how we can build a space in fashion where it can be cool and desirable to be like to be the whistleblower or the fighter or the rebel or the one who goes against, like being a rebel in fashion isn't it's just gets boring after a while. It's like the same people who get dragged up, on again and again saying the same things, and it doesn't feel sexy, like fashion has to feel seductive and a bit bad and a bit like non-conventional or a bit like subversive.
The about section,
and I don't know how to marry this.
The about section on the Vestoj platform does a really good job at expressing it, because you say, I think, bringing together academia, industry in a bit to combine academic theory, critical thinking, and a bit of good old-fashioned glamour. And I feel that's quite interesting also, especially now where it's like such a contentious word, and how do you hang on also to fashion history and like how attractive it is to so many people, especially nowadays when so many people kind of interact also with its legacy. How do you hold on to that and like move forwards, but like knowing that things have to change? And I think it's something we haven't we don't really know how to do and how to go about it, but I think it's really interesting that you have it up there, or you had it up there as like one of Vestoj's like, approach is like, we want to hang on to this, but also do this, and like, let's try.
Just some very short comment or reflection to that. Although, I mean, you tipped different subjects in your answer, Anja. Maybe the image of that we have there, this big monster, the industry, the fashion industry, that basically fight, or it's just there as the truth or the rule, and we have to learn to adapt it. It's suddenly there, and it's suddenly what has been built up. However, I'm not sure if the new generation, there I might slightly, I agree with you, each generation is not so different from one or the other, but then I think we have new accessibility for people through new technology. So we have also people that are informed and who are interested and who want to raise a voice. So I'm actually not so sure, or let's put it that way, I don't know, but I ask myself what education in a general term has as a responsibility, or even as a potential, if it comes to what you said, open up dialogue, knowledge exchange, but also methods, forms of actually integrating more than just making nice things, because it is okay to make beautiful things. It's part of culture, but it might for some not be the only fulfilling, I would say. And just one thing that came to my mind in regards to what new methods or knowledge exchange there could be, made me think of dance, because as you said, fine art was always somehow connected to academia. Dance was not for a very long time. It only became, on now it's really like blooming. We have in our museums here like contemporary dancers invited in museum spaces and all that. But so dance never was invited or never had its place in academia, so fashion doesn't. And but they found beautiful ways of dialogue, because it's a body moving and it's expression like fashion is. And I think maybe, there are indeed, how do you say, there is the art form and the critical dialogue closer together, maybe in other fields than fashion, but that are close to fashion. That's not really an answer to that, but I kind of wanted to throw that into the
when you were talking, it made me think about like this, you know, as a fashion theory was kind of establishing itself in the late 80s and 90s in particular, like 90s, early 2000s. It was also a time when there were a lot of individual designers with high conceptual component to their work, you know, Hussein Chalayan, Margiela, others. Like I wonder if there's also like now in,
and there was also the economy.
Was that?
The economy was going very well at that time. It's indeed, they could bloom or they could flourish because of the economy going so well.
Yeah, but now, like this, I think goes maybe to what you were saying also just now, Christine, like in terms of right now, well, now we don't, like the fashion industry still feels very much like a kind of monolith in a way. It's like there is one fashion system, one fashion industry, and there's a handful of designers and brands that are at the top, you know, in only, you know, 2 or 3 cities. and I wonder if, I'm not sure exactly how I do this, but you know, if there were genres that were more, you know, I'm thinking of how music works, for instance, like, or cinema, you know, that you have, you know, you have the Hollywood system, or you have the, yeah, I don't know what the equivalent would be in music, but then you have like, you have genres that where you can have superstars like in that genre that have really a loyal following and a, you know, big following in their lane, you know, and what they do doesn't, you know, it doesn't need to interact. They career without having to be part of big business. Like maybe in fashion, this is harder, so because we added to this where you use every year, and the collections have to be of a certain size, and you know, so that becomes really expensive. So it's hard to participate in the system unless you make a lot of concessions so that you know, cater to enough stores to get, you know, it's like to keep the whole machine rolling. But maybe challenging that production model, which seems to be happening more and more at the moment, can also lead to new ways of being able to work as a designer, like less pressure of having to, you know, being able to be more nimble somehow, or protean in terms of how you produce, and maybe able to produce, if you're able to produce more to demand, maybe it frees you up somewhat to, you know, to be able to be weirder or more niche, or maybe, you know, I don't know, I'd love to see a fashion industry that is, yeah, where there's more alternative in that way, where you don't have to be a designer, you know, attached to some, you know, as a creative director to some big brand in to be seen as successful, you know, where you can be someone's well-kept secret and still be big enough to support yourself and your business.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to end. So, hoping for more opportunities for emerging designers. Thank you very much for your time and your insights into fashion theory, fashion education. I hope it was as enjoyable for everyone listening and for you, Anja, as it was for me personally. Thank you, Christine, again for organizing all this. If Christine, I don't know if you want to say a word, or Anja, if you want to say a word. Otherwise, we'll let you have enjoy the last hours of sun.
That's not here, but I'm looking forward to not being flat anymore, and I'd really love the opportunity to come visit and to have a conversation along these lines, you know, in a way that feels properly informal, where it can be like just a sort of, I don't know, mini think tank or a exchange of opinions or
yeah, I think we can't wait for that to happen. Actually, we're all fed up with this.
It'll get there, I think.
This talk really kind of sparkled on my fire that indeed to have a round table for exchange, flat hierarchy, let's say, just, you know, exchanging ideas or thoughts or observations or questions without judging. And because I feel there are so many questions circling around from students, from designers in the industry as well. And I even see so many courageous young designers kind of resisting and saying, I'm gonna try my own way. Do you support me? And so, yeah, I think there's somehow there's a good energy around. And yes, let's hope to have you one day in Geneva, Anja. Would be fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy your evening wherever that is.
Thank you, Alette.
Thank you.
Bye. Ciao.
Ciao.
Anja, or do you want to stay on the line just for 2 minutes, or you have to jump?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Nina, do you want me to I think you can leave, right, if you want me to...
Non, parce que je pense que Julie, elle est... sorry, I speak French. In administration, sorry, if I put down I have to end the call to end the...
So, yeah, we'll be quick then.
Nina, the recording is still on, in case we were...
Yes, I know.
Otherwise, I'll just send you another Zoom link.